Nobody warns you that the people you birth can grow teeth sharp enough to chew through your dignity. My name is Evelyn Timothy, 70 years old, and this house, the one I'm speaking from right now, is the last real piece of my heart left on this earth. My husband and I bought it 42 years ago when we were young and sure of forever. He died in that upstairs bedroom holding my hand, and since the day they lowered him into the ground, I've kept our home warm, clean, and sacred. So understand me when I say I don't share this story out of spite. I share it because sometimes silence protects the wrong people. If you're listening right now, just drop a small heart for strength in the comments. So I know someone out there still believes dignity matters, even when family forgets it. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me, familiar and comforting like my husband's old hum when he used to chop onions at this same counter. I reached in for a bowl of potato salad. My potato salad, my groceries, when my daughter's voice cut through the kitchen like a jagged bottle. Don't touch that food. My husband's family are visiting today. She didn't say it quietly. She didn't pull me aside. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, as if I were a stranger sneaking around in someone else's house. I froze there with the fridge door open, the cold light bathing my hand like it had caught me stealing from myself. And then her husband added, from the living room with that lazy authority of his, "Listen to her. That's final." The audacity in his voice was heavy, like he thought issuing orders here made him somebody. His parents and younger brothers sat there watching the scene with smug little smirks, lips curled in that familiar way I've seen since the first day they met me. They never liked that I refused to sign this house over to them, since you live alone now. I remember the day my daughter asked me with fake softness, like a wolf in velvet, "Mama, why don't you let us take the house over? You don't need all this space." And I told her no, not because I needed space, but because memory needs room to breathe too. I heard them laughing in the dining room, my dining room, as the aroma of roasted chicken and cornbread filled the air. I stayed standing by that refrigerator, stomach twisting with hunger and pride, knowing I wasn't welcome at a table I set, in a home I built, with food I paid for. My daughter glanced back, confusion flickering for a moment, like she couldn't recognize the pain she put in my eyes. She didn't apologize. She didn't even lower her voice. She simply turned her back and kept laughing with them, loud and bright like humiliation wasn't hanging thick in the air. I closed the fridge, slow and careful, swallowing anger that sat hot in my throat. My husband used to stand in this kitchen on Saturday mornings, apron on, humming gospel while frying bacon. "Our home, our pride," he'd say, tapping my chin with flour-dusted fingers. I could almost hear him that morning, could almost feel that familiar tap, reminding me who I am. Humiliation is a strange thing. It heats your face, but freezes your soul. And I stood there, starving in my own house, wondering how you raise a child with love so deep it touches bone, only for them to grow up and treat you like furniture someone forgot to throw out. They ate and laughed, scraping plates, passing serving spoons from bowl to bowl, without thinking. Then suddenly, a sharp cough cut through the chatter. One of the younger brothers slapped his chest lightly, chuckling at first, then coughing again, harder, throat clearing like something wasn't sitting right. Someone reached for the serving spoon he'd used and dipped it into another dish. I stood perfectly still, hands clasped, watching silently as the first small crack in their perfect arrogance appeared right before my eyes. You learn a lot about people when you let silence answer them. That's why, after that first sting, I didn't argue or raise my voice. I just nodded like I was agreeing to the way they spoke to me. It was the quietest acceptance they ever received, and somehow it carried more weight than if I had thrown a plate across the room. I stepped back from the counter and let my hand fall to my side. I didn't even bother pouring a glass of water. Hunger can make your stomach ache, but disrespect, that bruises the soul. The laughter floated in again from my dining room. Chairs scraped, forks tapped plates. No invitation came, and I didn't ask for one. I simply pressed my palm against the cool countertop the way a drowning person might touch the edge of a boat, just to remember solid things still exist. They moved around freely like they owned the place. The father leaned back in the chair my husband bought from an antique shop downtown. The youngest boy drank from the crystal tumblers we only used for holidays. They didn't look around to appreciate anything. Not the china cabinet full of memories, not the old clock ticking steady on the wall, not the framed wedding photo of two young people dancing in a church hall as if tomorrow wasn't promised. To them, this was convenience, not legacy. I could hear my daughter's voice above, all the others bright, confident, controlled in that tone children use when they think they've outrun the hands that raised them. You know, Mama needs to downsize anyway, she once said, twirling her keys like she was already unlocking the front door. You're old and alone, Mama. This house is too much. She said it while pretending to care, brushing imaginary lint off my sweater, promising she'd keep it cozy for me. But that wasn't love. That was a plan. That was hunger disguised as concern. In their eyes, I wasn't a mother or a widow or a woman who held a life together with faith and elbow grease. I was simply an obstacle with a deed. So I stood there in my kitchen, listening to them pass serving spoons from tray to tray, dipping into bowls without a second thought. One of the boys scraped sauce from a shrimp dish I had made for myself earlier that week, then plunged the same spoon into a pan of vegetables. I noticed the motion in slow detail, the wrist turning, the spoon tapping, the sauce trailing across the lip of the next bowl like a ribbon of carelessness. They were reckless with everything: food, manners, respect. Reckless with the truth that not every stomach could handle what careless hands spread around. I leaned lightly against the counter, eyelids heavy for a moment, remembering my husband humming while stirring gumbo in that very spot, and how he'd say things like, "Be slow to anger. Evie, angry folks speak in heat and regret in cold." That memory steadied me. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Hunger grumbled through me, sharp and low, but pride held me tighter than hunger ever could. I watched the dining room doorway without stepping through it. My daughter passed by once to refill a pitcher. She caught my eyes, and for half a second her smile faltered. Half a second where her gaze flicked to the refrigerator, then to me, and something unspoken passed between us. Not love, not hate, but a dawning understanding that I wasn't as defeated as she wanted to believe. The father-in-law lifted a forkful of vegetables, laughing at something the youngest said. He swallowed, chuckled again, then paused. His hand drifted to his collar, as if the fabric suddenly strangled him. He rubbed his neck slowly, a crease forming between his brows, breath shallow, and in that moment the laughter in the room softened like someone turned the volume down without warning. I stood perfectly still, staring through the doorway, pulse steady as a rock underwater. His fingers pressed harder against his throat. A small cough slipped out, thin and strained, the kind of person tries to hide before they realize they can't. And I didn't move. I didn't blink. I simply watched, silent as stone, while the first tremor of trouble entered their celebration. Panic has a sound, and once you've heard it, you never forget. It starts quiet, confusion in someone's throat, a chair scraped back too fast, then it hits like thunder in a small room. I watched the father-in-law rub his neck harder. His face, reddening like embarrassment, turned into something else. His breath hitched, shallow, sharp, and suddenly the laughter died. The younger boy froze mid-chew, eyes wide. My daughter stood up so fast her napkin flew to the floor. And while everyone looked around in circles, waiting for someone to do something, I stepped forward like muscle memory had taken over. Calm is bred into a woman who's survived grief. Move, I said softly, already dialing, thumb steady, voice even as I gave the dispatcher my address. My breath didn't tremble, not once. I'd called paramedics in this house before, when my husband collapsed upstairs, clutching his chest, whispering my name like he didn't want to leave me alone with life. Back then I cried. Today I did not. The father-in-law clutched the table, coughing harder, wheezing now, his hand shaking as he tried to speak. His wife started pacing, wringing her hands, useless and noisy. The oldest boy darted for water. As if water could solve everything, foolishness started. I held the phone to my ear, giving details with the clarity of someone who has learned survival through loss. My daughter turned to me, desperation flickering in her eyes, pleading like I was the only anchor she had. Maybe I was. EMS sirens pierced the air within minutes, blessedly fast. Paramedics rushed in, their calm replacing mine, their voices neat, clipped familiar. They asked symptoms, asked allergies, asked when it started. They administered care, monitored breathing, lifted him with practiced grace. I stood near the doorway, back straight, hands folded, as if hosting a solemn ritual instead of witnessing chaos in my own dining room. The stretcher rattled past me on the hardwood floor, my husband polished by hand every New Year's Eve, and I thought about how some sounds never belonged in this house. Sirens, wheezing, raised voices, disrespect. My daughter hovered over the stretcher like fear made her small again, like she suddenly remembered who raised her and who fed her through every storm. "You okay, Mama?" she asked, voice trembling. I didn't answer. My eyes followed the paramedics as they guided the stretcher outside and loaded it into the ambulance. The engine roared. Blue lights bounced off my living room walls. And just as they pulled away, I heard footsteps approach. The son-in-law lingered by the doorway, jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grind. "You did something," he hissed low, like accusation could erase carelessness. His eyes were sharp, searching my face for guilt, for fear. But guilt lives in people who did wrong, and fear belongs to people who don't know their own strength. I brushed past him without a word. Silence stings harder than shouting. Outside, the afternoon sun hung low, warm but tired, like me. A neighbor stood at her fence, squinting toward the flashing lights disappearing down the street. She approached slowly, her face thoughtful, voice low. "You all right, Mrs. Evelyn?" she murmured. "I heard them earlier. They treat you like a stranger in your own home." I met her gaze, held it for a breath, then nodded once, small, controlled, unshaken. "I'm fine," I said, and I was not peaceful, but steady. She squeezed my hand before stepping back into her yard, leaving me with my breathing, my porch, and my thoughts. When I walked inside again, the house felt different, like walls can absorb disrespect and spit it back as resolve. My daughter and her husband stood in the living room whispering, stealing glances my way, panic rising like steam. I didn't say a word. I climbed the stairs slowly, fingertips grazing the banister. My husband varnished himself in my bedroom doorway. I paused, looking down the hall toward the kitchen where my dignity had been tested and my restraint proved sharper than any shouted retaliation. Then I closed my door gently, face still, heartbeat steady, and inside that quiet wood-paneled space, where grief once broke me open, a new decision settled deep in my bones, solid, cold, and final. There's a sound a house makes when it remembers who it belongs to. For me, it happened the moment the ambulance turned the corner and the last flash of lights disappeared. The walls settled, the air steadied, and something quiet but firm rose up inside me. Enough. I walked back into the kitchen where the serving spoons still lay scattered, where half-filled plates sat abandoned like guilt frozen in porcelain. I didn't touch a thing. I didn't clean, didn't wipe, didn't straighten a chair. Let the crumbs witness the truth. They didn't see a mother. They saw a mattress to sleep on, a kitchen to raid, a deed they believed would fall into their laps simply because time passed and I aged. I stepped toward the hallway closet and pulled down the small metal box my husband kept for house emergencies. He always believed in preparation, believed in protecting what we built. Inside sat a list of contacts: plumber, electrician, lawyer, locksmith. He once told me, smiling, that a home is only as strong as the woman guarding it. My hand trembled only once when I dialed the locksmith, not from fear, but from something raw, an awakening, self-protection disguised as grace for too long. Yes, I need the locks changed. Immediately. Thank you. My voice held no shake, no hesitation. I opened the guest room door next. Their luggage sat half unzipped, clothes spilling like they lived here without thought. I gathered each item carefully, not angrily, just purposeful. Folding shirts they left crumpled, placing shoes in pairs even though they never respected the ground I walked on. Not for them, for me. Order is a language dignity speaks. I carried the first load to the porch. Sunlight poured over the steps, warm against the wooden boards. My husband sanded himself the summer before cancer dimmed his strength. The locksmith arrived fast, a quiet man with tired eyes. He didn't ask questions. He simply worked, metal clicking, screws turning, the sound of a boundary being rebuilt. The moment the bolt slid into place on the new lock, a part of me breathed that hadn't breathed in years. When he left, I taped a printed notice to the front door. Permission to stay is revoked, effective immediately. Items have been packed. This residence is private property. No threats. No pettiness. Just truth dressed in ink. I moved back inside and saw something draped over the arm of the couch. A jacket. The younger brother's. Expensive brand. Tags still crisp, left there like he assumed my house was his closet. I picked it up, feeling its weight, its arrogance sewn into the seams. I folded it slowly and placed it on the porch too. Let him feel a little loss. Let something inside him learn you don't leave pieces of yourself where you don't respect the soil beneath your feet. The house was still again. Only the ticking clock spoke, counting the breath between who I was this morning and who I had become by afternoon. I walked upstairs, changed into one of my husband's old shirts, soft cotton, thin with memory, and stood at the window overlooking the street. Hours passed. The sun dipped, painting the street gold, and then headlights crawled into the driveway. Car doors slammed. Voices climbed from confusion to panic. What are these our things? Why are the locks changed? Anger sharpened next, sprinting through their throats. My daughter's voice cracked first. Mama, open this door right now. The son-in-law banged on the door with the palm of his hand, like the house owed him entry. You can't do this. Are you insane? I didn't move from my place at the window. I didn't blink when he kicked the bottom of the door. I simply watched from behind the sheer curtain, heart calm, breath steady, like a woman who finally chose herself in a house built on love and memory. My daughter stomped back down the steps and looked around, wild-eyed, calling my name again, voice strained, as if the word Mama had suddenly grown heavier in her mouth now that she needed me. Their outrage spilled across my porch, loud, frantic, disbelief twisting every sentence. And I stood there, still as dusk, knowing the line had been drawn and there was no stepping backward into silence ever again. People panic loud when privilege slips through their fingers. Their shouting rattled my porch like loose change in a tin cup, hollow and desperate. I didn't answer, didn't hurry, didn't soothe. I simply walked downstairs with the same quiet steps I had taken every morning making coffee beside my husband, steps carved into wood by decades of routine, not fear. When I opened the front door, they rushed forward, ready to storm back into a home they'd mistaken for theirs. I blocked the entrance with my body, small but rooted. You need to leave, I said calmly, voice steady as if I were reciting grocery items and not protecting the last sacred thing I owned. This is my home. You are not welcome here anymore. For a second, nobody spoke. My daughter blinked at me like her mind couldn't translate the sentence. She pressed her palm against the door frame, breath shaking, her pride catching in her throat. Mama, don't do this, she whispered, like she hadn't already done much worse. Her husband didn't whisper. He lunged forward, eyes sharp with entitlement and embarrassment. You can't kick us out. We live here. You stayed here, I corrected softly. Words matter when truth is under attack. He threw his hands in the air. Call the police then. I want to see you explain this. All right, I replied, and I dialed. The look on his face, the flicker of confusion, the disbelief that I would actually do it was almost peaceful to witness. As we waited, he paced like a man cornered by walls he didn't expect to have teeth. My daughter wrapped her arms around herself, body small against the cold reality settling around her. When the patrol car turned onto the street, I saw curtains shift from neighbors' windows, curiosity peeking through blinds. Shame travels fast on quiet streets. The officers stepped out, posture calm, hands not reaching for anything. Ma'am, what's going on here? One asked. I handed over my deed, and the written notice I'd taped to the door earlier. No trembling, no desperation, just paperwork and truth. They were guests, I said. I'm revoking permission for them to stay. No lease, no rent, no tenancy rights. The officer read slowly, then looked up at me, then at them. Is that correct? You don't pay here? You're not on the deed. Silence from their side first. Then the son-in-law exploded. We're family. That counts. The second officer shook his head. Not in housing law, it doesn't. My daughter's face crumpled like paper. Tears slid down her cheeks, heavy and slow, not from sorrow but from humiliation. Mama, please, she whispered, voice breaking like old wood under weight. Her husband swung toward her, irritated even in crisis. Stop crying. She'll soften. She always does. Oh, how wrong he was. I felt nothing but a deep, tired stillness, the kind that comes after many years of swallowing storms to keep the peace. The officer turned slightly toward me, voice low enough only I could clearly hear. You did the right thing. A simple sentence, soft as a prayer, sharp as a verdict. The husband heard enough to know the tide wasn't his. He clenched his fists, jaw tight enough to shatter teeth. This isn't over, he spat. You can't do this to us. We'll sue you. His voice cracked at the end, not fierce but frightened. I met his eyes, steady. I didn't argue, didn't justify, didn't defend. I simply closed the door slowly, lock clicking into place like punctuation at the end of a story they never believed I'd write. For a moment, I stood on the other side of the wood, breathing in the silence they left behind. Then I walked back into my kitchen, letting the calm settle around me like a second skin, knowing the real battle hadn't started yet, but my fear had ended the moment I refused to bow. Morning light slid across the dining table like it had something to confess. Outside, the street was quiet again, calm as if last night's shouting had blown away with the wind. But pieces in silence, pieces clarity with edges. I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of envelopes in front of me, bills still in their paper skins, bank statements folded crisp, grocery receipts creased where I once tucked them into my purse without thinking. Back then, saving proof felt unnecessary. Now, it felt like armor. A woman doesn't prepare for war expecting one. She prepares because life has a way of deciding when battles begin. I peeled open the first statement. Grocery totals highlighted week after week. Cleaning supplies, toiletries they emptied faster than I could replace. A streaming subscription I never used but paid for because we all watch things here. Their voice, not mine. I placed each proof beside the next, forming a trail of generosity they mistook for obligation. My phone buzzed once on the counter. A new message from my daughter lit up the screen, though I didn't rush to read it. The sound alone was enough to stir something old and tired inside me. I needed facts in front of emotion, numbers before sentiment. Only then did I tap the screen. We need to talk. You hurt us. Hurt. The word hit the air like a stone dropped in still water. I set the phone down and reached into the drawer beneath the microwave, pulling out a small folder where I kept things I thought would never matter, text messages printed as memories once, now as evidence. Mama, just sign the house. We'll take care of it. You shouldn't be here alone. Mama, think smart about your future. Mama, you know we deserve security. Those weren't requests. They were rehearsals for a takeover. Pressuring disguised as planning. I read each one with a steady breath, not letting my hands shake. Emotion can blur the truth if you let it. I wouldn't let it. I walked to the pantry closet, reached up to the high shelf, and pulled down the shoebox where I kept older paperwork. A grocery list fluttered out and landed near my foot. My husband's handwriting stared back at me, slanted, patient, tender. Chicken thighs, mustard greens, sweet onions, olive oil. I bent down and picked it up like it was something breakable. My chest tightened, not with weakness, but with memory pressing hard against the ribs that held it. I traced his letters with my thumb. He loved holding my hand in the store, teasing me about how I judged cantaloupes by sound instead of smell. I folded the list once, twice. With a breath that felt like swallowing years, I tore it down the middle, then again. Keeping everything sacred didn't save anything. Letting go was not betrayal. It was survival. The phone buzzed again. Voice message this time. I didn't listen. Instead, I turned to the table and began arranging documents into neat piles: utilities, groceries, bank withdrawals, repairs I paid for, screen captures of messages they wrote asking for the deed, asking about refinancing for the family, acting like the ink belonged to them. Each sheet steady under my fingertips. Proof. Truth. Boundaries in black and white. When the folders were full, I placed them in a tote bag and grabbed my keys. My lawyer's office was a 10-minute drive, but my heart didn't race, didn't speed ahead of the wheel. Panic was for the ones who didn't prepare. I arrived early, sat straight, answered questions plainly. And when the paperwork was slid across the desk to file a harassment notice and a property protection request, I signed with a hand that did not tremble. The pen moved smooth, like it already knew the lines. My lungs felt fuller than they had in days. The world outside hummed the same. Cars passed, wind rustled leaves. A bird called somewhere unseen, but something inside me stood up taller. I didn't look back when I walked out. I didn't hesitate at the curb. I simply stepped into the afternoon, like knowing a chapter in my life had closed with ink and will, not permission. The clerk's voice echoed faintly from memory as I stepped off the last courthouse step, her final words settling over me like armor, notice filed and dated. I nodded to myself, jaw set in quiet certainty. I had done what needed to be done. When I reached my car, I paused, hand on the door handle, breathing in the weight of what I just set in motion. I didn't flinch. I didn't waver. I simply opened the door, sat inside, exhaled once, and let the engine turn over as steady as my resolve. I parked outside the hospital with the same calm I used to walk into church on Sunday mornings, slow and composed, like my feet knew better than to rush toward trouble. The sliding doors opened, and the sterile scent of antiseptic washed over me, too clean and too sharp, like honesty after a long lie. I walked past nurses in soft sneakers and tired eyes, past beeping monitors and rolling carts, past the quiet sighs of families hoping life gave them one more day. I wasn't here out of obligation or guilt. I came because understanding the truth matters more when people are busy telling lies about you. I found the nurse's station first, and before I could say anything, the older paramedic from my living room appeared around the corner. He recognized me instantly. His voice lowered, gentler than earlier, like he saved softness for people who had earned it. "Your quick call helped," he murmured. No praise in his tone, just fact. Real fact, the kind you don't have to defend, the kind that stands even when someone tries to twist it. I nodded once, not out of pride, but acknowledgement. "Thank you for coming fast," I replied, and he gave a small knowing tilt of his head. The kind men give women they respect but don't need to explain it to. He moved on, busy with another life to save, and I continued toward the private waiting area. That's where I saw her. My daughter sat hunched over a clipboard on her lap, reading paperwork the nurse had just handed her. Her shoulders, once cocky and lifted high like she was born on a throne, slumped forward under the gravity of reality. I could see the page from where I stood. Allergic reaction, cross-contamination with shellfish residue. No evidence of external ingestion. Not my doing. Not my fault. Not my shame. She blinked again. eyes tracing each sentence like she hoped the words would rearrange themselves into something that didn't crush her narrative. Her fingers trembled at the edges of the page, and a breath shook loose from her chest, the kind of exhale people make when truth hits them harder than fear ever did. I stayed silent a moment, just watching her face shift. First confusion, then understanding, then the sharp sting of guilt sliding into her features like a shadow settling in the hollows of her cheeks. Without looking up, she whispered, barely audible, we mixed the spoons. I didn't move closer. I didn't offer pity or comfort. Some lessons don't need a witness, only room to land. My silence wasn't punishment. It was dignity breathing. She looked up, eventually, eyes meeting mine with a softness I hadn't seen since she was 10, and scraped her knee on the front steps, running inside for me to blow the pain away. But this wasn't a child's hurt. This was accountability dawning slow and painful. Her mouth parted, searching for a word that didn't betray her pride. Nothing came. It rarely does when truth arrives before excuses. The automatic doors slid open behind me, and heavy footsteps rushed in like a thunderstorm wearing sneakers. Her husband stormed toward us, anger stretched tight across his face like a mask stitched too close to skin. His voice cracked loud enough to turn heads. Where is she? Where's that woman? I know she did this. His finger jabbed the air near my shoulder as if pointing could turn suspicion into fact. Patients stared. Nurses paused. A security guard shifted his stance, ready if needed. My daughter flinched at the sound, guilt shrinking her posture. But he didn't see it. Rage blinds men who worship control. This is on her, he barked again, chest puffed, ignorance swinging wild in his voice. I stood still, eyes on him but emotions tucked neatly inside, like folded linens in a cedar drawer. Let him shout. Let him drown in noise while truth sat printed in black ink just inches from his wife's trembling hands. He didn't know yet, but storms come when wine stops feeding them. He hadn't realized the wind had already changed. In 2 slow breaths, I turned away from him, not defeated, not afraid, just finished. My heels clicked once against the polished floor as I walked toward the hallway leading out, my back straight, spine strong with a decision I had already made before sunrise. I didn't need to argue. The paper spoke louder than any voice in that building. Behind me, his shouting grew sharper, desperate, rattling against walls that weren't listening. I kept walking, quiet, measured, unbothered, leaving his rage trapped in the fluorescent light, while I stepped back toward a world where my power had already begun to return. The air felt heavier coming home from that hospital, like the house itself held its breath waiting for the next blow to land. Their suitcases still sat on my porch, untouched since the police stood here. The driveway gleamed from last night's drizzle, and the quiet reminded me of mornings when my husband and I would sit on this same stoop, sharing warm biscuits before the day began. I stepped up my porch steps slowly, each one firm beneath me, and unlocked the door with steady hands. The moment I stepped inside, a knock followed behind me, firm and quick. For a heartbeat, I thought they had returned to demand entry again. Instead, when I opened the door, it was my neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove, in her garden slippers and robe, phone in hand, breath a little short from rushing. Miss Evelyn, she murmured, eyes sharp with purpose. I have something you may want to see. She held up her phone and tapped play. The tiny screen showed yesterday's chaos in my kitchen, captured through her kitchen window camera angled toward my house, clear enough to see what mattered. It showed me standing by the counter, motionless, hands folded, not touching a plate, not touching a spoon, not involved in a thing. Then it captured them, careless hands swapping utensils, scooping from one dish to the next without thought, without pause. The brother laughing, dipping that spoon where it didn't belong. My daughter reaching across bowls, distracted and hurried. There I stood, still as Sunday peace, while they cross-contaminated their own food. Evidence didn't raise its voice. It didn't tremble. It simply existed, calm as a sunrise. Mrs. Hargrove exhaled, soft, like a hymn whispered. Into wood. God sees everything, she said quietly, eyes warm with something deeper than comfort. And sometimes he lets us see it too. I nodded slowly. Gratitude didn't need long speeches. I took the phone, saved the footage, then handed it back to her. Thank you, I said, each syllable holding more weight than a sentence twice as long. She patted my forearm gently. They try to make you look like the villain. Truth always has longer legs. She left me with that, shuffling back across her lawn, robe swaying behind her. I walked inside, placed my purse down, and set my keys in the ceramic dish my husband molded at a pottery class when his hands still had strength. I stood there in the quiet, letting the stillness settle. Then, without warning, another knock. Louder this time. I inhaled once, bracing, then opened the door. My daughter stood there alone. Her face didn't carry the fire from yesterday or the false confidence she wore like makeup. Instead, her eyes looked washed out, rimmed red, like the truth had wrung her dry in that emergency room. She didn't speak at first. She looked past me into the house, eyes tracing the doorway, the couch, the hallway, like she was seeing it differently, remembering it wasn't hers to claim. Behind her, her husband marched up the walkway, jaw clenched, gripped tight around his phone like it was a weapon. I don't care what some paper says, he barked from halfway down the path. She's not innocent. She planned something. Before I could respond, Mrs. Hargrove's voice floated over the hedge from her yard. Lies don't outrun truth, son. The son-in-law shot her a glare, but she didn't flinch. Strength recognizes strength. He started pacing the sidewalk, muttering, swearing under his breath. My daughter kept staring at me, her silence shaking harder than any scream could. Finally, her voice came out barely above a whisper, thin as tissue about to tear. Mama, can I speak to you alone? Her husband spun toward her, shock slicing across his face. Seriously? You're taking her side now. She didn't answer him, didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on me, something fragile trembling behind them, something I didn't rush to name. The wind rustled the bushes beside the porch. The house exhaled, quietly, waiting. I didn't move yet. I had learned the power of stillness. I simply stood there, hand resting lightly on the doorframe, watching her find the courage to face the consequences of her own choices. Her breath hitched once, shoulders rising then falling like she was trying to settle her heart back into her chest. Please, she whispered, voice small, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. Just a moment. I didn't let her step inside that day, not out of cruelty, but clarity. There is a difference between reconciliation and access, and one must come before the other. I told her to meet me another time, somewhere neutral, someplace where walls and memories couldn't be used as leverage. She nodded, eyes wet but voice steady. She walked away, and her husband followed, still barking accusations that even the wind refused to carry. When they disappeared out of sight, I closed the door gently and leaned my back against it, not from exhaustion, but from a kind of settling, like dust finally choosing the ground it belongs to. The next morning, the sun had barely stretched across the yard when I gathered the documents again. The air smelled like dew and fresh purpose. I placed each paper into neat order: bank statements, printed messages, the revocation notice, photocopies of the deed, with my husband's signature still bold beside mine, the footage Mrs. Hargrove sent, and the hospital report that named carelessness, not malice. Proof doesn't humiliate you. It holds you steady when lies try to drag you down. I drove downtown to my lawyer's office. The waiting room was quiet, filled with soft lighting and the low murmur of a printer spitting out someone else's truth. When my attorney called me in, I sat upright, hands folded on my purse the same way I used to sit in church pews, composed, prepared, listening for the right moment to speak. "Are you sure you want to move forward?" she asked after reviewing everything again. Her tone wasn't doubt, just due process, making sure I understood strength isn't always volume. Sometimes it's persistence. "I'm sure," I answered, voice steady. "They tried to bully me out of my own home. They pressured me. They humiliated me. They threatened me when I didn't surrender." She nodded as she tapped her pen, sealing intent into action. "Then we file for harassment and attempted coercion of property." The paperwork printed crisp and final. I signed each page with deliberate strokes, every curve of my signature rewriting the rules of how I would be treated going forward. Filing that countersuit didn't bring joy. It didn't bring revenge. It brought something quieter, like setting a heavy stone down after carrying it too long. When the clerk stamped the final document, her hand firm and practiced, the sound echoed against the marble counter like a gavel. Filed, acknowledged, recorded. I stepped outside into the sunlight, and for a moment I closed my eyes. My husband once told me, "A house is only safe when the people inside know its value." I didn't realize then he meant me, not just bricks and siding. On the ride home, my phone buzzed twice. I didn't look immediately. I wanted to feel the solid calm first, the way victory sometimes feels like breath rather than applause. When I pulled into my driveway, I checked the screen. A text from my daughter lingered, half-typed, then deleted. Only one phrase remained before the bubbles vanished. "I messed up." It sat there like a confession swallowed by pride. No apology, no acceptance of consequences. Just a crack in the armor. I set the phone down without replying. Growth doesn't bloom when watered by comfort. It needs honesty and dryness to understand thirst. Afternoon eased toward evening when the call finally came from my lawyer's office. "Court date is set," her voice said through the speaker. Something in my chest tightened and loosened at the same time, like pulling a knot that had waited years to unravel. "Thank you," I replied. Simple, measured, final. I hung up and walked to the living room window, watching the neighborhood settle into twilight. Porch lights blinked awake one by one, homes preparing for quiet dinners and warm beds. I stood still, fingertips resting against the glass, knowing I had safeguarded the life I built. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No cheering, no chaos, just me breathing in the peace I had earned and refusing to hand it over ever again. Morning light hadn't even settled across my curtains when raised voices leaked in from the street. Anger travels differently when pride is bleeding. It stumbles, stutters, claws for footing. I stepped onto my porch with the steadiness of a woman who no longer gives ground she built. Down by the curb, the younger brother stood with his shoulders slumped, hands shoved into his pockets like a boy who finally understood consequences aren't bedtime stories. His mother hovered near him, stiff and embarrassed, while the son-in-law marched back and forth like a dog chasing its own rage. "You used the spoon," the younger brother blurted, not defensive, just breaking beneath weight he wasn't built to carry. "You saw me, everyone did. I told you not to serve from that bowl again." His voice wavered, truth spilling even as terror chased it. The son-in-law spun toward him, face red, fists clenched at his sides. "Stop talking," he hissed. His volume wasn't loud yet. That came a breath later. Shame always starts quiet before it explodes. I leaned against my porch post, arms folded loosely. I didn't need to speak. Their unraveling did. All the talking. The mother of those boys shook her head, slowly, disappointment lining her face. "We told you about that allergy," she muttered. "How could you be so careless?" Careless, that was the word. Not malicious, not plotted. Careless entitlement, believing nothing in my kitchen could ever harm them because they assumed control where they had none. My daughter stood beside her husband, lips pressed tight, eyes darting between them all. She looked smaller than I remembered, like arrogance had been drained from her bones, drop by drop over the past days. She didn't defend anyone. She just stared at the pavement like truth had finally cornered her, and she didn't know which way dignity lived. We wouldn't even be in this mess if she— The son-in-law started, but the younger brother cut him off, voice cracking. "It wasn't her. Stop blaming her. I mixed the spoons. His voice trembled into silence, swallowed by guilt. I thought back, years ago, when that same boy sat at my table in December, feet swinging under the chair too short for his legs, face smeared with chocolate cake. I baked because children deserve sweetness more than bitterness. He laughed then, crumbs raining down like confetti, and my husband winked at me from across the kitchen as if to say, "This house feeds people in more ways than one." We fed them warmth when their world felt small. We fed them kindness because we believed kindness sowed loyalty, not ingratitude. Funny how abundance can blind the ungrateful into thinking the source will never run dry. A car slowed, neighbors rubbernecking because curiosity is a magnet when pride cracks in public. I stayed rooted, back upright, the porch railing cool under my thumb. The son-in-law's breathing grew louder, harsher. "You're ruining everything," he snarled at his brother. "Do you understand what you just did?" The younger one flinched. "I didn't mean—" "Shut up," he roared, voice cracking across the street like a whip. That was it. The moment shame toppled power. You could feel it like a dropped glass shattering on tile. The mother of those boys placed a hand on the younger one's back, guiding him toward their car, her expression carved from disappointment and fatigue. She didn't look at me, but her silence spoke its own sentence. She knew the truth, and she could not cover it. My daughter took a shaky breath, eyes flicking toward me for a fraction of a second, not begging, just realizing who she had followed and where it led. She didn't get to look away from consequences anymore. The son-in-law tried to grab her arm, but she stepped aside, jaw trembling, not in defiance, just disillusioned. Their chaos swirled in the street, but my porch stayed still. Peace doesn't need volume. It needs boundaries. The younger brother climbed into the back seat, slamming the door softer than he meant to. Shame will soften even anger when it hits deep enough. As the car engine started, the son-in-law kicked the curb and shouted, voice echoing off the houses like fury looking for a throat to land in. Then it came sharp and sharp-edged, cutting through morning calm. "You're useless! You ruined this!" His rage aimed outward before it would ever face his own reflection. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't flinch. I simply watched them fracture under a truth I never had to lift a hand to shape. The noise faded as they pulled away, but one thing stayed behind, dignity reclaiming its place on my porch like it never intended to leave again. The mediation room was ordinary on the surface, beige walls, neutral carpet, a long wooden table. But stillness has a way of revealing what words try to hide. My attorney sat beside me, files neatly stacked, pen poised like she'd practiced patience as long as I'd practiced restraint. Across from us sat my daughter and her husband. He looked sour, jaw tight like he was chewing. Resentment. She looked pale, eyes swollen from a night spent wrestling with a truth she didn't invite but could no longer outrun. The mediator entered, a middle-aged woman with soft eyes and the posture of someone who'd listened to decades' worth of broken agreements. She didn't waste breath on pleasantries. We are here to determine whether an agreement can be reached before trial. Each side will speak. Facts only. Facts only. Relief slid through me quiet and clean. We laid out the documents, not with theatrics, but with calm. Grocery receipts, bank withdrawals tied to their names, messages pushing me towards signing over the deed, payment history showing their comfortable life woven from my labor. My attorney didn't raise her voice. She didn't weaponize emotion. She simply placed truth on the table piece by piece until the story wrote itself without help. The mediator nodded slowly, lips pressed in a line that held understanding more than judgment. "It appears," she said carefully, turning pages, "there is a consistent pattern of financial dependency and pressure exerted on Mrs. Evelyn." The son-in-law scoffed. "We're family. Helping family isn't abuse." My lawyer met his eyes, steady as a glass lake. Asking for help is not abuse. Expecting ownership over someone's home because they helped you is. His mouth twitched, but no sound followed. My daughter kept her gaze on the table, fingers twisting in her lap like she was trying to wring guilt out of her bones. I didn't look at her to make a point. I didn't need to. I sat with my back straight, hands resting still, like my dignity finally had a seat at the table too. The mediator continued, "Mrs. Evelyn, did your daughter or son-in-law contribute financially to the household?" My voice did not shake. Not for bills. Not for food. Not for repairs. Not for anything that kept the house standing. Then I paused. I don't regret feeding them, but I regret they mistook it for weakness. My attorney placed her hand over mine briefly, a gesture not of pity, but of respect. "Grace is powerful," she murmured, quiet enough only I could hear. On the other side, the son-in-law shifted sharply, like he couldn't stand the air anymore. He jabbed his finger toward me. She abandoned us. She threw us out like trash. The mediator didn't flinch. She removed unauthorized occupants from her home. There is a legal distinction. My daughter's eyes glistened again. Her husband elbowed her under the table, frustrated she wasn't matching his energy. But her strength collapsed under truth she couldn't outrun anymore. The mediator leaned forward. Given the documented financial exploitation and emotional pressure, I advise a settlement. She glanced at them. Apology, restitution, agreement to cease claims. Silence hit the room like snow, soft but heavy. My daughter's lip trembled. Her husband looked like a man swallowing stones. We're not apologizing, he snapped. We didn't do anything wrong. The mediator sighed, closing her folder. Then we moved forward toward trial. The meeting concluded. Chairs scraped. Papers slid into folders. The air felt different when I stood, lighter, as if reclaiming myself had muscles now. As we stepped into the hallway, my lawyer leaned toward me. You carry yourself like a woman who never needed to raise her voice. I nodded once, grateful, not for victory, but for clarity. Behind us came a sound, a choked inhale. My daughter stood by the wall, hand over her mouth, body shaking with a grief she finally recognized wasn't mine to hold anymore. Tears fell, not dramatic, heavy, quiet, unguarded. She didn't reach for me, didn't call my name. She simply folded into herself under the weight of understanding she had helped build her own downfall. I watched for one heartbeat, not gloating, not aching, just witnessing a truth settling where denial once lived. Then I turned and walked toward the elevator, steps slow and steady, leaving her in the silence she earned. Humility doesn't always arrive dressed in softness. Sometimes it crawls in, scraped and shaking, wearing the dirt of every bad choice it rode in on. 2 days after mediation, the knock on my door wasn't loud like before. It was timid, small, like someone afraid the wood might talk back. I opened it slowly, and there they stood, my daughter, eyes tired like she hadn't slept, and her husband behind her, jaw twisted with pride he couldn't swallow. He held a folder in his hand like a peace offering poisoned by resentment. My daughter spoke first, voice thin as thread. Mama, we want to settle this. Not we understood. Not we're sorry. Just we want this over. He stepped forward, holding out the folder. We'll apologize verbally, and we'll pay back what you're claiming. That should end this. His voice tried to sound generous, but desperation sat underneath it, trembling. I took the folder without opening it. No, I said calmly, not like that. His forehead creased, anger flashing quick like a match struck too close to fuel. We're offering you exactly what you asked for. No, you're offering what you think is easiest on your pride. I replied, I need the apology in writing and a signed agreement that you will never attempt to claim this house again. His lips curled like I'd asked him to kneel in gravel. My daughter exhaled slowly, shoulders sinking as reality weighed down again. I had been waiting for the moment someone recognized the difference between surrender and accountability. She turned to him, voice barely rising above a breath. It's fair. For a flicker, he looked stunned she didn't back him. Then his face hardened. We're not giving her anything in writing. She wants humiliation. I want peace. I corrected, voice still low. Peace that won't be threatened again. He scoffed. You act like we're the villains. My silence was answer enough. My daughter's fingers twisted together, tears threatening at the edges of her lashes again. Mama, please, just let us apologize and pay you back. You don't need the rest. I do, I answered gently, because dignity without boundaries is just memory. She blinked hard. Something inside her cracked, quietly this time. She turned to her husband again. Just sign it. He stepped back like she slapped him, outrage staining his face red. You've lost your mind, he snapped. You're choosing her over me? My daughter didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply looked at him with a tiredness I recognized, the exhaustion of carrying someone who only knows how to push you to your knees. I'm choosing right over wrong, she whispered. He stared at her like he didn't recognize the woman standing there. Then, without warning, he spun on his heel and marched down the walkway, ripping open the car door and slamming it shut so hard the windows shook. The engine roared, tires screeched, and he sped away, leaving dust and shame in his wake. My daughter didn't run after him. She didn't plead. She stood frozen, hands trembling, chest rising and falling unevenly. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She handed it to me with a shaking hand. I already signed my part, she murmured. I did it last night. I unfolded the paper. Her apology stared back at me. Ink shaky but sincere, acknowledgement of wrong, promise to never challenge my rights or this home, words offering not just regret but respect. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't poetic, but it was true. And truth doesn't need polish to stand tall. I looked at her, just looked, letting her see the steadiness in my eyes. Not forgiveness, not coldness, just truth meeting truth. She swallowed, tears finally slipping free. I thought giving you less would protect us, she said softly. But it only protected the wrong things. She turned then and walked down my path slowly, like each step was stitching her back into her own skin. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The written apology sat warm in my hand, the ink a quiet shield I'd earned the hard way. I closed my door, gently, not in anger, but in finality. Some doors don't slam, they settle. And when they do, everyone hears it. The courtroom was small, quiet, and colder than the autumn morning outside, like justice preferred its air chilled to stay sharp. Lawyers shuffled papers, the judge adjusted his glasses, and the bailiff cleared his throat before calling our case. I didn't fidget. My hands rested still in my lap, the same posture I once used at my husband's bedside when prayers replaced sleep. My daughter sat 3 chairs down, shoulders drawn in, palms flat against her skirt, as if trying to hold herself steady. Her husband sat rigid beside her, jaw clenched, eyes darting like a man waiting for a storm but refusing to believe the clouds weren't bluffing. When the judge began, his tone was measured, procedural, but each word carried weight. After reviewing all submitted evidence, testimonies, financial records, and communications, he paused long enough for breath to thicken in the room. It is clear that Mrs. Evelyn Timothy was not the instigator, aggressor, or cause of any harm. My daughter closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, silently, like it didn't want attention either. The judge continued. Instead, the evidence supports a pattern of financial dependency and undue pressure placed upon Mrs. Evelyn to relinquish property rights. The son-in-law jerked forward in his seat, face burning with a disbelief that had nowhere left to go. His lawyer pressed a palm against his forearm, urging him to stay still. This court recognizes Mrs. Evelyn's right to revoke permission of residence and finds she acted within legal boundaries. A soft hum of whispers buzzed around the room. The judge's voice cut through them neatly. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed. Then the echo landed, final and irreversible. The defendants are ordered to pay restitution for recorded expenses and damages related to harassment claims. Not a large sum, just enough to remind them consequences have cost. The son-in-law slumped back, breath ripping out of him like a tire losing air. The judge gathered his papers. Court adjourned. The gavel struck once, clean as truth. My lawyer placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, the kind of touch meant to steady victory rather than inflate it. "You handled all of this with grace," she whispered. "Most people would have come swinging." I nodded, voice quiet. Swinging wastes breath. Standing costs strength. In the hallway, we stood apart, not enemies by blood, but strangers by choice. My daughter approached, steps small, remorse stitched into each one. She didn't speak. She simply looked at me, pain and understanding sitting side by side in her eyes. I gave a slow nod, acknowledgement, not embrace. Not yet. Some bridges require time to mend their wood before feet can cross. Outside, the sky was gray, wind shifting leaves along the sidewalk like life nudging forward whether we're ready or not. I returned home, calm as still water. I brewed tea and sat by the front window, letting steam warm my face while the world settled. It wasn't long before a car pulled up to the curb again. This time no entitlement, no false confidence. Just resignation. They stepped out slowly, carrying bags, duffels, clothes stuffed into trash bags, the way dignity gets packed when pride has spent itself empty. They weren't yelling anymore. They avoided my eyes. My chest didn't swell, didn't harden, didn't soar. It simply rested. The younger brother approached the porch steps hesitantly. His voice came low, scraping humility. "Ma'am, thank you for not pressing charges." His gratitude quivered between guilt and relief. I gave one small nod. Sometimes mercy isn't softness. It's a door closed gently instead of slammed. He turned back to the car. Shoulders curved inward like a boy too young to carry consequences, but old enough to know they follow anyway. They lifted luggage, not toward a home, but toward uncertainty. Not kicked out, just returned to the life they always claimed was beneath them. I watched from behind the curtain, breath steady, heart quiet. I didn't open the door, didn't wave, didn't gloat. Let silence handle what words couldn't cleanse. When the last bag hit the curb and they stood there, homeless not by poverty, but by ego's failure, I felt no triumph, only peace washing slow and deep like evening tide. Justice isn't loud. It just arrives. Shame travels ahead of people like a warning bell. I didn't have to follow them to know the son-in-law's family closed their doors the moment the ruling came down. Word spreads quick when pride breaks in daylight. That afternoon, a neighbor across the street called out to me while pruning roses. They tried staying with his parents, she murmured, shaking her head. Didn't even make it past the porch. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need it. Sometimes exile isn't physical. It's the moment every place you once assumed would hold you suddenly sees you clearly and refuses. Days pass quietly in my home. I cooked small meals, watered my plants, sorted through keepsakes of my husband, his watch, his handwritten sermons folded in a Bible, his favorite cufflinks resting in a velvet pouch. Peace lived here again, walking room to room like it never left, just waited for me to remember I deserved it. But outside these walls, reality was teaching its own lesson. I saw their new address on an envelope mistakenly delivered to my mailbox, one of those aging apartment buildings near the freeway, where walls thin out arguments and ceilings groan under footsteps from the floor above. The name printed on the page sat heavy, not triumphant. Consequence doesn't always scream. It settles like dust on forgotten furniture. Days later, I passed by that neighborhood on my way to the market. I didn't look for them. Still, there they were, my daughter and her husband carrying grocery bags, the cheap, thin kind that cut into fingers when you have more burden than strength. 2 plastic bags each. Sparse. The kind of groceries someone buys when they never learned how to stretch $1 because they always expected someone else to. Their building stood tired and chipped, paint peeling, a broken tricycle left in the walkway, voices echoing through open windows. Laughter here, arguing there, life pressed too close on all sides. Not punishment, just the cost of believing comfort belonged no matter how they behaved. My daughter lifted the bag higher on her arm, eyes fixed on the stairs ahead. Her husband grumbled as he fished for the keys, irritation scraping his tone. Would have been easier if she gave us the house, he muttered. That was his gospel, entitlement dressed as logic. He didn't say my name. Some people can't bring themselves to speak it when they finally understand they don't control the story. My daughter didn't answer him. She moved slowly, shoulders curved inward, hair pulled into a loose bun that showed how exhaustion can steal grace even from the young. They climbed the stairs without noticing me. I turned away, not out of avoidance, but because dignity doesn't require an audience for someone else's consequences. By evening, I sat at my dining table, the same wooden one my husband polished every Christmas Eve. Steam rose from a bowl of stew, rich with herbs and history, the scent warm enough to fill the room like gratitude. I ate quietly, thinking of how many nights I fed them here, how laughter once lived in this house without cost attached. Hunger feels different when you've never known it. Want feels heavier when you once believed you were owed more than you earned. Across town, they settled into their new space. A single window faced the parking lot. Cars passed with headlights cutting into the room, shadows moving across walls like regrets pacing. I could imagine the sound of muffled televisions through the walls, someone arguing down the hall, plumbing knocking when a neighbor ran water upstairs. Humbling lives aren't always prisons. They're mirrors. And mirrors don't lie. Later that night, while washing dishes, I pictured her in that apartment kitchen, not out of spite, just understanding. The sink small, the light harsh, the counters narrow, her hands resting on the edge because tears have weight and sometimes they need something solid to land on. I didn't see her face. I didn't have to. Silence speaks loud when pride collapses. The image lingered. Not vengeance, not joy, just truth settling in like dusk. A daughter, head bowed, shoulders shaking quietly over a tiny sink, realizing too late that the house she once dismissed held more than walls. It held foundation, and she left hers behind. The seasons turned without asking anyone's permission. Winter laid its quiet over the streets, and by the time spring crept back in, the hydrangeas by my front porch woke up first. Soft blue petals shaking dew like laughter returning to a house that finally remembered joy. I spent mornings trimming them, humming the same tune my husband used to whistle when he watered the azaleas. Peace ain't loud. It sits. It rests. It breathes steady. My days found rhythm again. Early tea on the porch, a walk to the park, where older ladies waved like we shared a private club of quiet victories, evenings spent reading on the sofa while the clock ticked gentle reminders of time, used well, not wasted on the ungrateful. The silence in my home no longer echoed. It settled like a quilt tucked around me. I dusted picture frames, polished wood, fed myself good meals. Hunger no longer brushed my doorstep. No voices ordered me out of my own kitchen. No footsteps marched through my hallways like they owned air I paid for. One morning, after watering the roses, I pulled my husband's framed photo from the shelf. It had been lying flat since the day disrespect tried to take root in my home. I wiped the glass slow, my thumb tracing the outline of the man who built a life beside me brick by brick, kindness by kindness. Then I stood it upright again on the mantel. That was not decoration. That was restoration. Later that week, I went to the market for fresh greens and cornbread mix, small comforts I'd earned. The aisles were calm, grocery carts rolling like soft footsteps across tile. I reached for a bundle of collards and felt that familiar stillness you feel when someone's eyes recognize your name before their voice remembers how to say it. I looked up. There they stood, my daughter holding a basket with only a few items inside: eggs, rice, 2 cans of beans. Her coat looked thinner than winter deserved. Her husband beside her, shoulders slumped, face drawn, the arrogance stripped clean off like bark peeled from a tree. Poverty doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits on people's clothes, on their cheeks, in the way they hold their bags with both hands, because letting go means starting over again. Their apartment had not been kind to them. Small spaces shrink pride faster than hunger does. My daughter swallowed hard. Her lashes fluttered like she was chasing courage she used to wear easily. Mom. Her voice cracked, small, raw, not the voice that once barked orders in my kitchen like entitlement was a birthright. Her husband looked away, pretending to examine cereal boxes he couldn't afford, unable to meet the eyes of the woman he once tried to unhome. I held her gaze without flinching, not harsh, not angry, just steady, like a full glass that doesn't spill even when someone bumps the table. I nodded once, acknowledgement, not invitation. No bitterness in my chest. Bitterness is heavy, and I put mine down the day I locked my door back into my name. I saw the apology tucked behind her lips, but apologies don't always belong to words. Sometimes they live in downcast eyes, in the weight of grocery bags paid for with humility instead of arrogance. She blinked, and one tear slid down, quiet as a confession. Around us, registers beeped, baskets rolled. The world kept moving. Life doesn't pause for regret. It lets you stand inside it until you're ready to walk through. I offered her a soft smile, gentle, distant, final. The kind of smile that blesses someone on their journey without offering to carry their luggage. Then I turned my cart and walked toward the checkout, shoulders straight, peace wrapped around me like Sunday morning sunlight. Behind me, I heard nothing, not a plea, not a call, only silence accepting its place. Outside, the air smelled like jasmine and fresh starts. I unlocked my car, put my groceries in neatly, and when I sat behind the wheel, I exhaled deep. Not relief, completion. There are endings that burn, and there are endings that bloom. This one bloomed. They tried to starve me in my own home. Life fed them the lesson for me.